Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about knee slide. Now, knee slide is something that we see very commonly, and it's something that's promoted heavily in weightlifting circles as Olympic lifting, and people oftentimes point out knee slide doesn't hurt your knees if you're hitting depth. It's nonsense, it's not dangerous, and what we mean by the knees sliding forward, it's when your knees track past your toes. When your knees track past your toes. Now, I will be the first to agree that if you have strong hamstrings, if you have weak hamstrings, it is dangerous actually. If you have strong hamstrings and you go deep, it's not an injury risk. However, what it is a strength risk, and it is a 1 rep max problem. This is where we run into problems with it. What do I mean by that? When we judge someone's squat, we expect them to hit parallel. Okay, we expect them to hit parallel in competition for a 1 rep max. Now, you don't get bonus points for going deeper. Right? That is the strength standard that is set when we judge someone's strength. And as I always say, the big three, and most of these big lifts, are nothing more than a test of brute strength. That is what they are. They're a test of brute strength. But if you choose to do a non-standardized version of the lift that makes it harder and you can't lift as much weight, that's only your fault if you are seen as weak compared to other people. So this is where technique and leverages actually do matter. Because I'm not saying technique and leverages don't matter when we talk about brute strength, but what is technique? Putting your knees and feet and hands in the right spot. That is what technique is. Moving the bar through the correct path. And you can actually muscle your way through the correct path if you just get strong enough. Now, what do we see all the time? We see people who talk about problems with dorsiflexion. We'll see people who put on weightlifting shoes so they can get that heel elevated. They can hit that depth and everything else. But this is a non-issue if you are power squatting. All of these problems that people discuss are purely for the Olympic squat. They are not factors in the power squat. You don't need an elevated heel. You don't need amazing mobility or flexibility or range of motion. Do you know why? Because if your knee doesn't track forward, why do you care about dorsiflexion? You could have it almost fixed. You could have a broken ankle that has had its range of motion severely compromised and still power squat. Why? Because it's not a test of flexibility. The power squat is a test of brute strength. Now watch when I do these speed squats, and the same thing with the max squats. Notice that my shin stays perfectly upright, and then when I do the maxes I sit further back. Now you'll also notice my depth is higher when I get further back. These I hit parallel on the exact same height of box, and I want that to be very clear. My feet are in the same position because they are against the edges of the rack. I can't change the footing any different because the edges of my feet are against the bottom rails on the rack on both sides. They're spread as wide as my equipment will let me go. Then when I do these maxes, I want you to note my knees actually have a reverse slide. I sit further back. Why? It's learning to use the box. But when the box isn't there, you can't do that. If the box is gone, the squat will be forced to look like the speed squat wanted. So what's the point here? Well, I can hit more weight by sitting further back. I can get more muscle involvement. Drive off the box better. Learn better eccentric control. Okay? But I want you to notice something. When you look at the angles, and there's math on this, and this has been looked at in biomechanics, the further your knees track away from your ankle, meaning any non-upright aspect of your shin, will make it harder to hit depth. You'll have to have a deeper hip angle to hit depth. Okay? In other words, you can reach parallel without squatting as deep if you keep the shins upright. I want to state that again. You can reach parallel, which is an arbitrary biomechanics number because it's just relative really to the ground. You can reach parallel with less flexion of the hip if you keep the knees upright. It's easier. You don't have to move the weight as far. Okay? You don't have to move the weight as far, and you don't have to have as much range of motion in your hips. Now, the best way to keep the shin upright is to take a wide stance. Best way to do it is to take a wide stance. We know this, it's understood. We also achieve this by learning to sit back. We learn to sit back, and this is where the box squat becomes valuable. It's also where the good morning becomes valuable. Because if we sit backwards and we don't drop straight down, what happens? The knee doesn't slide as much. Our knee tracking is completely different. Okay, our knee tracking is completely different. Now, a lot of people will say, well, I can't sit back. You know why? Because you have weak hips. You have weak hamstrings. Again, another reason when people say really, really silly, ignorant ass shit. Like the hamstrings aren't involved in a back squat, they're not a primary mover. Right? Do you know how stupid you sound when we're talking about controlling the eccentric rep and the knee tracking? Are you under the assumption that the concentric is the only part of the squat that matters? Because last time I checked, none of you who are squatting are doing dead pin squats for concentric only. Last time I checked, that's not called a squat. So if you need strong hamstrings and strong hips to push your hips back and sit backwards, which again reduces the range of motion, reduces the amount of hip angle required to reach parallel, which is how we judge the strength on a squat, then it lets you kind of cheat at a max squat. If you have an extra muscle that allows you to change the bar path to let you cheat on a 1 rep max, you're telling me it doesn't matter? What are you going to tell me next, that knee wraps don't matter? There are guys who squat 80 to 100 pounds more in meets when they put knee wraps on versus no wraps, and they do two different styles. You're going to tell me knee wraps don't help either, right? Because all they do is compress on the eccentric rep. It's the sort of nonsense that people come up with. Right? You need strong hamstrings, you need strong hips, you need a strong posterior chain so that you can push your hips back. Because if we push the hips back, and this is where I differ on the whole high bar versus low bar. People act like the low bar lets you do this. It's not the low bar that lets you do it. It's your posterior chain, it's your stance width, learning how to perform a movement. It's nothing to do with the bar position, because I'm doing it with a high bar right now. Okay, that cuts the range of motion. And it lets you get more muscles involved. If we're able to activate more hip, like more adductor, more abductor, both, we're able to get more hamstring involvement. We're able to maintain a slightly more upright torso position because of our knee position. If we're able to do all these things, we're going to lift more weight because we are involving more muscles. We have a more efficient bar path, and we've slightly reduced range of motion. That combination can be worth enormous amounts of extra weight. And it's not cheating, it's performing the lift in a way that lets you bring the most muscles to play with the best bar path. That would be like saying, benching in a straight line is cheating. You have to make it zigzag through the air. You have to find the most shitty, inefficient bar path possible or you're cheating. No. Olympic squats are shitty. Olympic squats are complete shit for anything but doing the Olympic lifts. They're called Olympic squat or weightlifting squats for a reason. They have carry over to the full clean. They help you with your clean and jerk. It's a sport-specific movement. It is not intended to develop the most muscles. It's not intended to lift the most weight. Okay? Because a 700-pound squatter, which is what some of these guys could be, who are squatting 550 or 600 in the Olympics, right? They could be 700-pound squatters, but being a 700-pound squatter doesn't carry over because they don't have the ability to clean and jerk 700 pounds. They squat in an inefficient manner because it replicates the biomechanics of the full clean, because you can't power squat in a full clean. At least most people can't. There's some who can. It would be unusual though. Right? To learn to keep those knees back. And then guess what? Dorsiflexion, hip flexion, all these things that people complain about with their range of motion don't matter that much anymore, do they? Alright guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.